What happens when a world-famous comedian storms onto a talk show and runs straight into a 27-year-old press secretary with nothing but facts, focus, and fire in her voice? He had the mic, she had the message, and when the laughter faded, America chose clarity over chaos. This isn't just a debate, it's a masterclass in calm. One of them yelled, the other stood her ground, and the whole country watched it unfold, second by second. If you believe truth doesn't need to scream to be heard, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment. Did Karoline change your view on leadership? Share this with someone who still thinks volume equals victory. Let's keep the conversation going, because the next moment like this, you'll want to be here when it happens.
What happens when comedy crosses the line and someone finally stands up for the truth? Tonight, Chris Rock mocks America's healthcare crisis on live TV, but then Karoline Leavitt walks in, calm, young, armed with facts, not punchlines. In just minutes, the crowd flips. The stage turns into a battlefield between celebrity noise and public service. And for once, it's not the loudest voice that wins. This isn't just a debate. It's a turning point, and what Karoline says will leave you stunned. Stay with us, because the moment truth takes the mic, everything changes. It was supposed to be just another episode of The Pulse, a live talk show known for lively panels and tough topics. But what unfolded that night was anything but routine. The stage lights warmed the sleek studio as host Samantha Pierce stepped forward with her signature composed charm. Tonight, she began, we asked the question, America keeps dodging. Is our healthcare system being fixed or falling apart? The topic was hot, the room was full, and the audience knew they were in for something big. But no one, especially not Chris Rock, knew just how far it would go. As applause settled, Samantha gestured stage left. Please welcome comedian, actor, and cultural commentator Chris Rock. Dressed in a crisp black jacket and denim shirt, Chris walked out with that signature smirk and a mic already in hand. He didn't sit, he didn't wait, he pounced. Folks, he said, I gotta be honest. America's healthcare plan, man, I'd rather get sick in a gas station bathroom than walk into one of these hospitals. The crowd roared. Under Trump's plan, he continued pacing the stage. You don't get a diagnosis, you get a bill that makes you question your will to live. I saw my ER invoice last year and thought someone sold me a used Ford. The laughter was thunderous. Chris wasn't just warming up, he was on fire. He leaned into the mic, grinning. You ever try to refill a prescription these days? You need a pharmacist, a lawyer, and a second mortgage. He raised his hand, pretending to pray. Lord, if you're going to take me, make it quick, because the copay is going to kill me faster than the disease. The crowd was loving it, clapping, whistling, nodding in agreement. Many in the audience, especially older Americans, knew the pain behind the joke. They'd lived it, skyrocketing premiums, denied claims, surprise bills larger than their pensions. Chris had touched a nerve and turned it into a punchline. Then Samantha's voice cut through. Thank you, Chris. And now joining us from the other side of the aisle, please welcome Karoline Leavitt, White House Press Secretary. The applause dimmed to polite interest as a different kind of presence entered the stage. Karoline was calm, dressed in a simple navy blazer, hair pulled back, eyes focused, stride deliberate. No mic in hand, no smirk, just silence. Chris turned to her with a grin. Uh-oh, the government just walked in. Should I sit or should I apply for Medicaid now? Laughter sparked again, but this time it didn't swell quite as loud. Samantha gestured to the empty chair across from Chris. Karoline, welcome. You've heard the opening. Thoughts? Karoline didn't smile. She didn't rush. She sat placed, both hands on the table, and glanced toward the crowd, then back at Chris. Thank you, Samantha, she said, voice clear but controlled. Chris is funny. No one's denying that. But people don't come to hospitals for jokes. They come because they're scared they're sick and they want help. Chris leaned back, smirking again, but Karoline didn't stop. We're here tonight to talk about real people, real policies, not punchlines. So when someone mocks our work to reform healthcare, I'll be the one who answers not with jokes, but with facts. The audience began to shift. You could feel it. The tempo had changed. What started as entertainment had turned serious, and Karoline wasn't rattled. She was ready. Chris chuckled, trying to reclaim the moment. Well, if the facts include 20-page bills and $300 Tylenol, count me out. Karoline didn't flinch. Actually, she replied, if you'd stayed informed, you'd know this administration capped insulin at 35 per vial, expanded veteran access to telehealth, and cut emergency room wait times in pilot states by 18% over the past 12 months. The audience was no longer laughing. They were listening. Chris raised his brow. Wow. Stats already. That was fast. You bring a spreadsheet with you, Karoline? She nodded. I brought receipts. Because when it comes to health, people deserve more than applause. They deserve answers. The back and forth hadn't even begun in full, but part one had set the table for something electric. Chris Rock had come to entertain. Karoline Leavitt came to defend truth with cold, hard data, and her calm intensity had just turned a comedy segment into a national moment. The tension didn't need words. It radiated from posture silence and the look in Karoline Leavitt's eyes. As she stepped out from stage right, the audience instinctively quieted. Unlike Chris Rock's explosive entrance, Karoline emerged like a storm forming on the horizon, controlled, cold, and impossible to ignore. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer blouse, buttoned to the collar, her expression wasn't angry. It was something far more unsettling for her opponent composed. Her eyes scanned the room with the calm of someone who didn't come to perform, but to correct. Chris Rock shifted in his seat, already loading a comeback, but the room wasn't laughing. They were watching her now. Samantha Pierce turned, trying to keep her voice neutral. Karoline, Chris has offered some strong opinions tonight. What's your take? Leavitt didn't rush. She exhaled slowly, then spoke with deliberate clarity. Chris has a gift. He makes people laugh, and that's needed in this world. But I'm not here to entertain. I'm here for the people who don't find their ER bills funny, for the mother choosing between insulin and groceries, for the Vietnam vet who's been on a wait list for a surgery he needed last spring. The room shifted again. No applause yet, just attention. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice firming. So let's not pretend this is a comedy set. This is healthcare. And when it comes to life and death, jokes don't fix broken systems. Facts do. Chris grinned, clearly preparing a retort, but Karoline continued, without giving him a second of oxygen. She pulled a single folded paper from her inside jacket pocket and laid it flat on the desk in front of her. Let's talk numbers since everyone here deserves them, she said. In the last 18 months, the administration has capped insulin prices at 35 per vial. That move alone impacted over 8 million Americans, many of them seniors living on fixed incomes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She had their ears now and their lived experience. She glanced at the card, then back to the audience. In states that embraced our rural care expansion program, ER wait times dropped by 18%. The number of primary care physicians in underserved counties rose by 12%, and the uninsured rate among working adults down by 3.2% nationwide. Chris leaned into the mic. That's a lot of stats. Can they cure a headache? She turned to him unfazed. No, but they cure systems that leave people behind. You're here to poke holes with punchlines. I'm here to patch those holes with policy. There it was, a line clean enough to slice the stage in half. The studio was still. Samantha blinked but said nothing. The crowd didn't cheer yet. They were processing. Chris Rock, normally the one in control of pace and tone, looked like someone just turned off his spotlight. Leavitt wasn't done. You joked earlier that our plan sends people home with a bill instead of a diagnosis, she said, locking eyes with him. But here's what you didn't say. Under President Trump's directive, community health centers received a $1.2 billion funding boost last fiscal year, resulting in over 4 million additional patient visits nationwide. That's not a punchline. That's a lifeline. Chris adjusted his seat, clearly looking for the right time to jump in, but Karoline kept the rhythm. And while we're at it, let's talk about veterans. You joke about paperwork. We've been digitizing records, cutting claim approval time from 118 days down to 72. That's not flashy, that's not viral, but for the vet waiting for a knee replacement or PTSD counseling, it's everything. She paused for the first time, not to rest, but to let the truth land. Somewhere in the audience, someone started clapping. Then another, and another. It wasn't wild or forced, it was deliberate. Appreciative, the kind of applause that says finally someone's saying what we live. Chris, trying to stay loose, chuckled. I get it. You brought the binder, I brought the mic. Karoline tilted her head slightly. You brought the noise. I brought the numbers. We'll see which one the people remember. Samantha Pierce tried to reset. Karoline, I can see you're passionate about this, but some argue the system still isn't working for everyone. Karoline didn't flinch. No system is perfect, but the worst thing we can do is mock the ones trying to fix it. Progress doesn't always trend on TikTok. Sometimes it looks like a diabetic grandmother paying $35 instead of $600 for her medication. Sometimes it's a rural clinic staying open another year because someone in Washington fought for its funding. Those don't make punchlines. They save lives. Silence. Even Chris didn't interrupt this time. The camera panned across the audience. Seniors, parents, veterans, many nodding quietly. Not because of political allegiance, but because their lives had touched the system she was describing. They didn't need to Google her statistics. They'd felt the difference in their mailboxes and medicine cabinets. Karoline folded the page back into her jacket and finally leaned back. Say what you want about policies, Chris. Make jokes. That's your lane. But I know this: when you laugh at something broken, you risk normalizing it. I didn't come here to laugh. I came here to fight for the people who can't afford to anymore. And with that, she stopped. The stage didn't need music or flashing lights. Her words did the lifting. Chris tapped his mic twice. You finished? Karoline didn't blink. Just getting started. Chris Rock didn't miss a beat. The applause hadn't even fully faded before he leaned forward, eyebrows raised, grin sharpening. So, that's what this is, a data dump on live television. You brought Excel sheets to a comedy show. I brought laughter. You brought charts. A ripple of laughter returned to the room, but this time it wasn't as loud. Something had shifted. The room that once laughed easily now carried a tone of caution, like they were trying to figure out if it was still okay to laugh at what came next. Chris pressed on. Come on, Karoline. People don't live by pie charts. They live paycheck to paycheck. They're not worried about bar graphs. They're worried about going broke from one trip to the ER. He turned to the audience, arms wide. You know I'm right. When was the last time you saw a hospital bill and thought, oh, thank goodness it's affordable? Some people chuckled. A few clapped, but others hesitated, nodding instead with furrowed brows. It was the sound of a crowd torn between two truths, one familiar in tone, the other sobering in substance. Karoline didn't flinch. She stood up, not abruptly, but with the precision of someone who'd been waiting for that exact line. Her heels clicked once as she leaned slightly toward Chris, voice calm but razor-edged. You're right, Chris. Americans are living in fear of medical bankruptcy, fear of being turned away at urgent care, fear of watching a loved one suffer because they can't afford an MRI. She turned toward the audience, sweeping the room with her eyes. But here's what you're leaving out: in states where we push through policy changes, average insurance premiums drop 21%. That's not speculation. That's reality. That's money back in people's pockets. That's hope. Chris opened his mouth, but Karoline lifted a hand. She wasn't done. You joked about children earlier, she continued. Let's talk about that. Last year alone, over 12 million kids received free immunizations thanks to federal programs. Your jokes would have people dismiss. That's not a punchline. That's public service. And if one of those shots kept a child out of the ICU, then it's worth more than 1,000 standing ovations. The studio was dead quiet. Even Chris leaned back slightly, lips pressed together. The grin was still there, but weaker now, guarded. Karoline's voice didn't rise. It sharpened. You can make jokes about broken bones and broken systems, but every time you do, you risk turning someone's real suffering into satire. And let me tell you, people who've had to decide between rent and chemo, they're not laughing. Chris tried again. I'm not making fun of sick people, Karoline. I'm making fun of the people who say it's all fixed. Because it's not. Karoline nodded. Exactly. It's not fixed. But it's being fought for. That's the difference. You tear it down for laughs. I build it up with policies. You mock the process. I show progress. There it was again, the line that drew the battle line in bold. Samantha Pierce stepped in lightly, sensing the rising temperature. Chris, Karoline, both of you are clearly passionate. But let's get back to the core question. Is the system improving or not? Chris leaned forward, taking the bait. Improving, look, I don't care how many charts she brings. I know what people feel. You can't fix fear with stats. I meet people every day who tell me they're one bad test result away from moving in with their kids, or worse, skipping treatment entirely. That's real. Karoline didn't miss a beat. And I meet the same people, Chris. The difference is I don't leave them with punchlines. I leave them with resources. The crowd stirred, clapping, this time a few even rising slightly in their seats. The energy was shifting again and fast. Chris Rock reached for his mic like it was a lifeline. Resources. You mean paperwork and waiting lines? Karoline stepped closer. Her tone not louder, just clearer. No, I mean telehealth access for rural seniors. I mean prescriptions covered under Medicare Part D reforms. I mean clinics that stayed open in small towns because of federal lifelines. Your monologue ignored. Chris looked out at the audience again, but now even his signature rhythm was breaking. He went for one last punch. You act like I'm the problem. I'm just saying what people see. They see a broken system and a bunch of Washington folks patting themselves on the back. Karoline didn't blink. Then let's tell the whole story. Yes, the system has problems, but the worst thing we can do is normalize those problems with humor. Because the moment people start laughing at dysfunction, they stop demanding better. And with that, the crowd broke. Applause, strong and rising, echoed through the studio. Chris looked around, then down, then tried to steady himself, but his grip on the narrative had slipped. Karoline finished it clean. You're right about one thing, Chris, people are scared, but they don't need another reminder of their fear. They need someone to fight for their relief. I don't bring jokes, I bring solutions. And tonight, I brought them here to show people that truth doesn't need a laugh track. She sat down slowly. Chris sat back, jaw tight. The room didn't need another word. Everyone had heard the message, loud, clear, and undeniable. The moment Chris Rock raised his voice, everything changed. He wasn't joking anymore. He was pacing, gripping the mic like a weapon, each sentence louder than the last. I don't need your stats, Karoline, he barked. I've got eyes. I see the truth. I see poor people skipping pills. I see seniors cutting tablets in half just to make it through the month. I see families begging pharmacies for mercy. You think your charts fix that? The audience was quiet, not like before. The energy was nervous now. Chris wasn't commanding the room, he was pushing against it. His delivery had shifted from clever to frantic. His jokes were turning into outbursts, his confidence into something raw and jagged. Karoline didn't even blink. She stood again, slow and measured, her voice still even. You have eyes, Chris. So do I. She looked at him directly. And right now I see a man using people's suffering to score applause. You see fear and frustration and you turn it into material. I see it and I fight to fix it. Chris shook his head, muttering something under his breath, but she didn't stop. You've got 3 Emmys, Chris, she said, taking a single step forward. Congratulations. I've got something else, over 20 million Americans who now have access to affordable care because of the policies you just spent 10 minutes mocking. The crowd stirred, clapping started. Not explosive, not staged, just real deliberate from people who recognize substance over sound. Chris turned his back to the table, arms wide, to the crowd, as if to say, "Are you buying this?" He tried to recover. "You talk about saving lives. That's noble. But the truth is, you're up here reading from a teleprompter. I'm talking from life. You think those 20 million people care about your talking points when they still can't afford a hospital stay." Caroline raised her chin unshaken. "I don't use a teleprompter, Chris. I use reports from the Department of Health and Human Services. I use briefings from rural doctors, veteran clinics, single mothers, Medicare recipients, and independent pharmacists. I don't need a script when reality speaks louder." Chris let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, so now you're the voice of the people." "No," Caroline replied, without hesitation. "I'm their microphone." The crowd erupted. That was the turning point. The applause wasn't polite anymore. It was passionate. They weren't clapping because she had the right job title. They were clapping because she said what they'd long felt, that their pain deserved more than punchlines, that someone on stage finally took their story seriously. Chris, caught off guard, tried to jump back in. "So now we're in church. You want a pulpit too?" Caroline didn't even glance at him. She looked at the audience. "You've heard him call your pain funny. You've heard me call it fixable. That's the real divide. He stands on a stage and says, 'Isn't it ridiculous?' I stand here and say, 'Let's make it better.'" Chris raised his voice, but it cracked slightly. "I make people laugh because the truth is too painful. You think stats make that better? What about the man who lost his wife, waiting on a hospital bed? What do you say to him?" Caroline paused just long enough for it to matter. Then softly, but clearly, I tell him we're doing everything in our power so the next wife doesn't die waiting. I tell him that fixing a broken system isn't done overnight, but we are doing the work. And I tell him that if we give up and give in to cynicism disguised as comedy, nothing gets better. Ever. Chris looked visibly shaken now. His pacing slowed. His gestures grew less fluid. For the first time, he seemed unsure of what to say next. He tried again, weaker this time. "Look, maybe you've got your policies. Maybe you've got your stats. But I've got 50 million people who follow me because I speak truth." Caroline responded instantly, not with volume but with precision. "And I have 20 million Americans who don't follow, they depend. They depend on affordable insulin, on reopened clinics, on childcare tax credits, on Medicare expansions. And tonight they depend on someone standing here not to win an argument, but to win them a little more dignity." The applause returned. Bigger now, sustained. Chris stared out at the audience. He raised the mic one more time, but he couldn't get the words out fast enough. His lines now felt recycled, shallow, incomplete. He looked to Samantha, hoping to pivot. Samantha raised her eyebrows slightly, giving him the floor, but not rescuing him. Chris tried one final punch. "You want to be the hero tonight, Caroline, go ahead. But I'm still going to say what everyone's thinking. This system is a mess." Caroline nodded. "It is. And that's why I won't waste one more second joking about it." And just like that, the air shifted completely. Chris Rock, the master of the mic, the king of timing, stood silent, while Karoline Leavitt, a 27-year-old press secretary, walked back to her seat without needing to raise her voice. She didn't win by shouting louder. She won by staying grounded, in facts, in people, in purpose. The studio lights had dimmed, but the battle was far from over. As the final applause faded and the credits rolled on the pulse, Karoline Leavitt calmly exited stage right, her blazer crisp, her voice steady, her message clear. Chris Rock, on the other hand, stormed off to the green room, his expression tight, his jaw clenched, his ego bruised. Moments later, he slammed open the door, pulled out his phone, and hit go live on Instagram. The screen lit up with his face sweaty, flushed, furious. "I don't lose," he shouted, his voice shaking. "I'm Chris Rock. I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't need stats. I don't need charts. I speak the truth." And tonight she tried to bury me in spreadsheets. Within minutes, over 250,000 viewers flooded the live stream, eager to hear what the comedy legend had to say after his public unraveling. But what they got wasn't charisma or control, it was chaos. She had the crowd, sure, Chris barked, but they don't know me. I made people laugh when she was still in high school, and now she wants to talk GDP. You can't throw percentages at people dying in hospital hallways. His voice rose again. You all saw it, right? I was trying to keep it real. I said what everyone thinks. And now suddenly, I'm the bad guy. The comment section exploded, but not in his favor. Chris. She made you look unprepared. You were shouting. She had facts. Respect to Karoline, calm under fire. This ain't it, man. You're losing your cool. The flood of criticism caught him off guard. For the first time in years, the audience wasn't with him. He paced the room, phone in hand, muttering, "No way I lost. I made her react. That means I hit something." But no one was buying it. Because while Chris ranted live, Karoline had already posted just one line. No video, no graphic, no selfie. Facts don't scream. They stand. That single sentence exploded on X. Within 30 minutes, the #RockVSLeavitt trended nationally. Under it, side-by-side clips went viral, Chris yelling into the mic, pacing like a cornered man, versus Karoline calmly listing healthcare reforms, with her hands folded and tone steady. It wasn't just a style contrast, it was a leadership contrast. TikTok videos emerged with split screens, some using slow motion to show Chris flinching while Karoline stayed locked in. YouTube Shorts dubbed it "The Night the Mic Lost to a Mind." Even late-night comedians began joking not about Karoline, but about Chris's meltdown. Chris Rock yelled so loud, Siri filed a noise complaint. Karoline didn't debate him, she surgically dismantled him. Meanwhile, Fox News ran a headline, "Karoline Leavitt, calm, clear, and unshaken." CNN followed with "Chris Rock goes off script and off the rails." The media didn't care about party lines anymore, they were chasing the clip that America couldn't stop watching. In the West Wing, Karoline sat with her media team scrolling through mentions. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply said, "It's not about going viral, it's about staying truthful." Her assistant replied, "You've become a symbol, and people are responding." By the end of the night, her ex-post had over 68,000 likes, thousands of shares, and a wave of comments praising her poise. Some were from veterans, some from parents, many from older Americans who recognized something rare. A young public servant who didn't shout, didn't dodge, but stood her ground with reason. At the same time in Los Angeles, Chris Rock's team urged him to log off. His manager, Tony, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You need to stop, Chris. You're feeding it." Chris shook his head. "She played cold. I played real." Tony sighed. "You played loud, and they didn't like it." Back online, fan pages began to flip. Even those loyal to Chris posted "Still love Chris," but Karoline owned that stage. A meme went viral overnight. Chris yelling with the caption "Volume Victory" next to Karoline's still frame that read "Calm Wins." Morning news shows picked it up before sunrise. NBC's Today Show, an unexpected twist in public discourse, when a comedian met his match in a 27-year-old spokesperson armed with numbers and restraint. MSNBC, Karoline Leavitt may have just rewritten the rules of political media. Cool logic outdueled fame and fury. Even the Wall Street Journal chimed in with an op-ed titled, "When Data Defeats Decibels." Chris Rock didn't sleep that night. He kept checking comments, watching clips, reading posts. His follower count, once soaring, had begun to drop. It wasn't drastic, but the message was clear. He hadn't just lost control of the narrative. He'd handed it to her. By contrast, Karoline's rise was quiet, steady, and grounded. No follow-up attacks, no secondary speeches. She didn't need to scream. Her words, already spoken, were doing the work. That morning, while Chris hid from cameras, Karoline walked into a veterans policy briefing on Capitol Hill, shaking hands with older service members, listening, asking questions. When a reporter asked about her performance on The Pulse, she replied simply, "I didn't go there to perform. I went there to defend the truth." And for millions of Americans watching from living rooms, hospital beds, church halls, and veterans centers, that made all the difference. By morning, the headlines weren't asking who won. They were declaring it. Fox News ran the banner, "Leavitt does the unthinkable, defeats Chris Rock without raising her voice." The New York Times followed, from punchlines to policy, how a 27-year-old press secretary silenced the stage. CNN's ticker read simply Karoline Leavitt, calm, clear, unbeaten. Across media outlets, the message was uniform. Chris Rock, one of comedy's sharpest minds, had entered the arena expecting a verbal joust. Instead, he'd walked into a clinic on how to argue with integrity. What the world saw wasn't a takedown, it was a demonstration. A young woman stood tall with facts, listened more than she spoke, and dismantled fury with clarity. Chris, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. After his emotional livestream flopped, his team pulled down the video, but not before it racked up over 4 million views and lost him nearly 300,000 followers. The comment sections of his pages remained brutal. "She didn't just beat you, Chris. She showed us how much yelling you've been hiding behind. This wasn't about politics. This was about poise. Time to take a break. Legend. You got outclassed." Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt wasn't gloating. She wasn't tweeting. She wasn't doing a victory lap. She was working. That same morning, she sat down with CNN's Abby Lowell for a live interview. No makeup team, no lights turned up, just a blazer, a ponytail, and her usual clarity. Abby leaned in. "Karoline, last night was unexpected. You went toe-to-toe with one of America's most iconic voices. Some say you silenced a giant." Karoline smiled just a little. "I didn't go to silence anyone. I went to speak for those who don't get invited on stage." Abby nodded. "But you knew it was going to be combative. You held your ground without yelling. That struck people." Karoline paused, then answered slowly, "There's power in calm. I wasn't there to win a shouting match. I was there to defend the truth and do it in a way that respected the people we're supposed to serve." The clip went viral in minutes. Again, she said less, but said it better. In a culture drowning in sound bites, Karoline Leavitt had just redefined what strength on camera could look like, not in fury, but in conviction. Later that day, the Wall Street Journal published an op-ed titled, "The Quiet Firepower of Karoline Leavitt." It called her performance a masterclass in public leadership. She did what no fact-checker editor or viral campaign could. She made truth the loudest voice in the room by not yelling at all. Chris Rock remained silent for 48 hours. His PR team issued a single line: "Chris will be stepping back to reflect on the past week." It was the first time in years he'd been publicly quiet. Meanwhile, Karoline's star didn't explode, it rose steadily. Quietly. Respectfully. She didn't change her tone. She didn't rebrand. She stayed on message. And older Americans especially noticed. On Facebook groups for veterans, Medicare advocates, and even church communities, clips of her remarks were shared thousands of times with comments like, "Finally someone who speaks like a public servant, not a performer." She reminded me of the way we used to debate with facts, not fire. I may not agree with all her politics, but I respect her heart. Her following grew by over 500,000 in just 3 days, but more than followers, she gained something far rarer in modern media: credibility. Older viewers who had tuned in, expecting another political spectacle, instead watched something familiar: a young woman showing the same kind of composure their generation was raised to admire: respectful, prepared, humble, and unshaken. As one viewer posted, "She didn't yell, she didn't mock, she stood like my daughter would have, and I'm proud of that." By week's end, PBS aired a segment titled, "The Leavitt Lesson Composure as a Political Tool." It wasn't about parties, it was about posture. A generation weary from decades of shouting finally saw someone who represented what they believed leadership used to look like. Chris Rock. He stayed out of the public eye. No interviews, no stage appearances. A few comedians defended him, but most admitted what millions had already realized: he got outmatched not by aggression but by grace. Meanwhile, Karoline returned to her regular duties, briefing press, sitting in policy meetings, visiting health centers. She made no reference to the viral storm. When asked again in a press gaggle what she thought of the public response, she shrugged lightly and said, "It was never about me. It was about the message." And in that moment, America knew the winner wasn't the loudest voice. It was the clearest. In a world increasingly filled with noise, one powerful truth stands tall, calm. Conviction is stronger than loud opinion. Karoline Leavitt didn't win the debate because she shouted louder. She won because she stood firm, spoke clearly, and let truth do the work. For older Americans who've seen decades of shouting matches on TV, it's a reminder of something timeless. Real leadership doesn't demand attention, it earns respect. This story reminds us that dignity, preparation, and quiet courage can still carry the day. In our own lives, whether it's speaking up for a neighbor, attending a town hall, or having tough conversations with family, we don't need to raise our voice to make an impact. We need to raise our standards for how we speak, how we listen, and how we serve. So if this story spoke to you, if it made you proud, thoughtful, or just a little more hopeful, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor truth, courage, and the values that built this country. Because in the end, truth doesn't scream, it stands. And sometimes that's all it needs to do.